What's up guys, Dice here. 10 PC building mistakes. 1. Mixing power supply cables. You should never ever mix power supply cables because the layout is different, and don't think if the cables look similar that means that they will work, or even if the cables fit into the power supply. No, don't ever use another power supply cables because this will literally fry your entire PC, and I've seen that multiple times. So don't ever mix power supply cables.
Personally, I found a way to destroy thousands of dollars of components in a single moment. A couple years ago, I bought a used computer that came with a CPU, a motherboard, a GPU, and a case. This thing was in pristine condition and even included these pre-routed power supply cables, even though a power supply wasn't actually included. But I thought to myself, no big deal. I'll buy it, lug it home, and grab one of my modular power supplies and just remove its cables. That way, I could make room for the power supply cables that were already plugged into the components, saving me a couple minutes of rerouting. Happy with my time-saving decision, I powered on the system, only to be greeted by the devastating smell of smoke. It turned out I fried every component. And so, learn from my mistake by not mixing and matching power supply cables even within the same brand. Doing so is a dangerous game with expensive consequences.
The only exception if you bought power supply cables and you are 1,000,000% sure that these cables are for the same power supply model. At this point, you can use them just fine. Number 2, using one memory channel. So if you used one memory channel, you will lose performance. If you have only one stick of RAM, you can't use two memory channels, but if you have 2 sticks of RAM, you can use 2 memory channels. And basically the first 2 RAM slots are memory A, and the second 2 memory slots are memory B. So to use both memory channels, you need to put 1 stick of RAM in memory A and 1 stick of RAM in memory B. Basically, just offset them by 1. For example, leave the first slot empty and 1 stick of RAM. Leave the third slot empty and 1 stick of RAM. This way you utilize both memory channels. So number 3, cutting off the power from PC. This damages the hard disk. I'm not talking about the regular shutdown. No, but if you hold down the power button, you turn off the PC immediately, because this way cuts off the power from your PC. Whether you hold the power button to turn off the PC, or you unplug the power cable. This way you turn off the PC immediately, you damage the hard disk. And honestly, I thought myself that this was a myth. I broke my hard disk this way, and even if you did not break your hard disk, this will introduce problems to your hard disk, you might see slowdowns or something like that. But if you don't have a hard disk, this will not do anything to your PC. Don't get concerned. Number 4, cheaping out on thermal paste. If you have a very budget PC, maybe $400. I mean, $400 you don't have a lot of money to spend on thermal paste. But if you bought a $1,000 PC, you should never cheap out on thermal paste, because it does make a very big difference. These $1 and $2 thermal paste, I did use them personally, and I've seen benchmarks about them, and they are pretty bad. So you spend $10 on a good thermal paste, because this will last you probably 5 years. It can literally make a 20C difference. I'm not talking about the cheap thermal paste, but the very cheap thermal paste. Number 5, buying an SSD without memory cache. Usually the 240 gigabytes does not come with memory cache, and memory cache basically makes, let's say you copy a file, this file will be copied into the RAM in the SSD, and this way it will copy the file very fast. But if you don't have memory cache, the SSD will be slow. Usually, as I said, 240 gigabytes and less does not come with memory cache. I always recommend you to buy 480 gigabytes SSD capacity and more if you want to buy an SSD. And 240 gigabytes SSD is not enough anyway. So honestly, I always recommend you to buy 480 gigabytes and more of SSD storage. So number 6, changing the PC components while the PC is on.
Oh, there we go. That's it in.
Nice.
That's cute. Do we lock it in first?
Yeah, lock it in.
All right, lock it in. Oh fuck! No! Bro, how the did that happen?
Yeah, I don't know how you did that.
How did that happen?
Why the didn't we even turn it off?
Oh, we didn't even unplug it.
I'm not saying that while the PC is running, no. Like even if you turned off your PC, the electricity is still running in your motherboard because the motherboard is just waiting you to short the power pins to run the PC. So to turn off the PC completely, you need to unplug the power cable or turn off the power supply from the switch, and after that discharge the motherboard capacitors by just turning on the PC for like 5 seconds. This will discharge all the capacitors, and this way you can change your components safely. Honestly, this is a very important thing to remember, because I've seen people fry their motherboards and their CPUs while doing this because they did not unplug the power cable. Number 7, not using the first PCIe slot. I know, like, I don't think anyone is like using his GPU in the second slot, but maybe the PCIe slots are not the same. The first one is the fastest one and the second one is a little bit slower, at least the bandwidth, in terms of bandwidth. So like if you have a very crappy GPU, I don't think you will see any difference using the first slot or the second slot, but like if you have a high-end GPU, using it in the second slot, it will lower its speed. Honestly, like I have no idea why would you use the second slot, only use the first slot. Yeah, basically. Number 8, over tightening screws. Like you can literally break traces, and if you broke any traces, basically your motherboard is e-waste. Like you can't fix it because fixing traces is basically impossible. So never ever, don't over tighten the screws. Like basically when you feel the resistance, just stop, don't tighten them so much. Number 9, make sure the motherboard BIOS support the CPU. Even if the CPU and the motherboard are compatible, they may not work with each other because the BIOS is outdated. Let's say this motherboard produced before the launch of 5000 series AMD. Okay, let's say this is an AMD motherboard AM4 and you have a 5000 series CPU, but this motherboard produced before the 5000 series CPUs, so the BIOS is outdated. It does not know the 5000 series. What we will need to do is update the BIOS, and in order to update the BIOS, like you either need an old CPU to use it to update the BIOS, or if the motherboard support flashing the BIOS without a CPU, and like especially the like high-end motherboards, they support this feature, which like you just plug a USB stick and like the BIOS file is in the USB stick. You can just update the BIOS without CPU, without anything. This way you update the BIOS and you use your no CPU. How do you know that the BIOS support the CPU before you buy the motherboard? Well, like you need to look at the motherboard if it supports 5000 series CPUs out of the box. Look at the like reviews or look at the comments, you may see this information. So number 10, updating the BIOS. You should never update the BIOS if you don't really need to, because even if you updated the BIOS correctly, you can literally break your motherboard. This actually happened to me. I literally, when I built my first PC, I updated the BIOS, and after I updated the BIOS, the motherboard was completely bricked. It did not even like see the CPU. It was stuck at CPU checking. So like there was a very huge problem. It was completely bricked, and as I said, like I updated the BIOS correctly. I don't know why this bricked the motherboard. In fact, I bought another motherboard, a new motherboard, because it was completely bricked. I bought a new motherboard, and after 1 year of using the new motherboard, I thought to myself, why don't I fix my motherboard? So I did actually. I bought external tools and components, physical tools to fix the BIOS, and after so many attempts, like probably I spent like 2 to 3 days doing research and a lot of headaches, and after that I actually did fix it. I tried to update the BIOS again to see whether it was my mistake or if there was something wrong. After I updated the BIOS again, the motherboard was completely bricked. I still don't know. I still don't know the reason. So just to be safe, don't ever update the BIOS. You don't really need to update it. And also guys, I sell Windows 10 Pro keys. They work with Windows 11 too for $8. If you are interested, just contact me via the email below.